Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. We broadcast Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. through 11 a.m. Central Time, right here on GCN. Jason is engineering the broadcast. If you'd like to call us, we'll pay for the call. 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. Telephone listen line is up and running. 605-477-3249. I've been waiting to do this broadcast for quite a while, and I'm really delighted to be broadcasting with my dear friend Lee Wickenhauser. Lee Wickenhauser is the Senior Manager of Sales and Advertising at Genesis Communications. He is the man who was instrumental in bringing USA Prepares to Genesis Communications Network. Welcome, Lee Wickenhauser.
How you doing this morning, Vinny?
I'm doing really well. I'm so glad to be doing this because you and I have a passion in common. Both of us love tinkering with cars, fixing cars, improving cars, and
definitely
repairing cars. And it's something that we just love doing. And it's not a job; it's a passion. It's something it's a hobby as well. And so we're going to talk about buying used cars today. What do you need to know from our perspective? Things that Lee Wickenhauser does when he buys used cars and things that I do when I buy used cars. What to look for, what to be concerned about, what not to do, what to do. Lee, first of all, let's start with this question. Why should someone consider buying a used car versus a new one?
Well, sometimes, a person always has to consider their budget or, what their needs are. Things I take into consideration. I myself have owned, well into the over 200 different cars in my life, and I'm middle-aged, so it's quite a substantial number. But I don't believe in paying, the price of a brand new car, and the minute you drive it off the lot, you are instantly in the negative. I don't like that fact. I don't like the way depreciation is so rapid. They shouldn't be, but for the used car market, it's a really good thing because the depreciation will help you save money in the end as long as the vehicle's been well taken care of and, free of problems.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. And to me, in addition, new cars are way too complicated for me, way too complicated, to the point where many of them are just not repairable or maintainable by the owner. They are tied to a leash, with a leash to the dealership, because the dealership has that $30,000 computer that only the dealers seem to be able to have. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Here's a prime example. I ran into this scenario. An 06 Buick LaCrosse, great car. They have their issues like every other vehicle, but when I purchased the car, it did not come with a key fob. So I did notice that through the options list or the RPO codes, I found out that it had, in fact had the ability to have a key fob for remote door locks and a factory remote starter. And so I ordered some off from a local parts dealer and got them in, and then I started looking into programming them. I would have had to have taken it to a dealership to have it programmed. I called my local GM dealer. They wanted $169 for 15 minutes worth of work to use their computer. So here's another little tidbit for that, is there are other companies out there that can program them for the vehicle outside of a dealership. Searching them out and finding them can be a little bit tiresome sometimes, but a very good friend of mine, Cody, is a manager over at a local Batteries Plus. So I gave him a call. I know he deals with aftermarket key fobs. And he said, absolutely, I can program it. It costs you $25. So there are other alternatives out there other than doing that. But these auto manufacturers are making it so you have to go into a dealership to have service done, which, you know, for the small mom and pop shops out there that have been in auto repair for decades, they're starting to close down because they can't afford these computers and the scanners and the programs, things of that nature. It's just getting to be a really tough world out there.
Well, I can put an exclamation point on what you said about $1. And here it is. So you said a 06 Buick LaCrosse key fob, $169 to program it at the dealer. We bought a Ford Escape, our son did, and he's going to fix it up and resell it. And it came with one key, okay? And the auto theft system triggered. So you can't repair that. You need, we had to get a new computer for it. Take the computer aside. I think the dealer wanted about $1,600, $1,500 for the computer. We found one that used for, let's say, $140 thereabouts. And we had to get two keys. Got two blank keys. And the dealer wanted $170, $1 different from what your Buick dealer wanted to program the key. Ford wanted $170 to program it. And we ended up programming it ourselves because we read and figured out how to do it. It's not all that easy, and it's tricky, it's cumbersome, and it's not necessary to have to do this in order to start your car. Well, I mean, it is necessary, but it doesn't have to be like this. We have created technology that's really difficult to live with, like losing your key fob. That's a big problem.
It is, and, you know, as auto manufacturers try to scramble to cut costs and raise prices on cars, things like there used to be two door lock keys, or two door locks on every car. Now there's just one. There used to be a way to open your trunk with a key if, you know, you ever lost power to the vehicle or just in an emergency situation, or you couldn't open the driver's door. Let's say somebody parked you in on both sides. How are you supposed to get into the car? So now it creates other issues. You know, they have all these fantastic things nowadays, you know, Bluetooth radios, satellite radio. They have, you know, heated seats, heated steering wheels. But these are comfort items. You know, auto manufacturers need to go back to what are the things that people actually need in a day-to-day environment. My wife has a 2005 Ford Excursion, and the driver's door lock froze. And the rear hatch lock, which fortunately still has a key, was very corroded, so that wouldn't work. And the batteries had died in the truck overnight, and the truck was locked. So fortunately, I have a lockout kit in my shop, and I was able to unlock it. But what if she would have been at the store or broken down on the side of the road, and it's minus 50 degrees outside, and she has, you know, two small children with her? What do you do then? You break a window? You know, what if you don't have something to break a window to gain entry? There's these things that that these dealers and manufacturers are doing that just don't make sense anymore. I don't feel they really have the true human interests of people anymore.
You're right. We bought a Chevrolet Trailblazer. I think it's an 05, if I'm not mistaken. And our son and I were outside, and we were going to move the vehicles around in our yard so we could position, get ready to work on this particular vehicle. He closed the doors, and he heard, you know, clicks. What was that? It locked itself, and we did not have a key fob at that time. So I called the dealer. The dealer said, "Bring it in." I said, "I don't think you understand. I can't bring it in. It's all locked." And he said, "Well, call the police." So what? Call the police? Why would I call the police? Why would I call a guy to, you know, come over here with a gun because I can't get in my car? And he said, "Well, sometimes they have a Jimmy." I said, "We can do that." And so I called OnStar. OnStar asked if there was a pet or a person locked in the vehicle. I said, no, that was the wrong thing to say. I should have lied and said yes, because then it would have unlocked the vehicle for me. They told me they couldn't help me, but they'd connect me to a towing service. I mean, so these automatic systems are problematic, and they cause problems for the owners. And if you can avoid that stuff, You really should. And just because you have a key fob doesn't mean you can get in your car, because they require batteries. And if you don't have the battery with enough life left in it, you're still not going to get in your car.
Oh, exactly. And what ends up happening, too, is like the police department nowadays, in my area, I'm in Minnesota, and they don't do it for free anymore. It used to be a service. Now, that's not even the case anymore. Nowadays, you have to, either have AAA or call a local towing company, and on average, it's about $75 for somebody to get into your car for you. And that's just the beginning of it. These automatic door lock systems, they're fine, but what's nice is, some of the Fords and some of the Chevys, Chryslers and stuff, there's menus you can go into through your private personal settings to turn off certain things. But some of the things that I feel should be optional aren't. Prime example, tire pressure monitor systems. It's a federal law. If you have it on your vehicle, the dealer cannot shut that off. So if you don't want to have to pay every so many years to have new monitors put in, or sensors put in your tires, you'll have a dinging and a beeping light and, all this other stuff, these lights on in your dash, which to me are annoying. I don't like that. I like to know what's going on in my vehicle, but you can't turn them off. Otherwise, you have to live with this dinging or a light, and I don't think that's fair. That should be something that's optional. People have become, I hate to say this, it's not a generalized comment, but yet it still kind of is. People have gotten dumbed down when it comes to their cars. You have things that will tell you when the computer thinks your oil should be changed, or when your tires are low, or when your oil levels are low. These are things that the owner of the vehicle or the driver of the vehicle should be responsible for checking. Even today, I'm not a big tech person, but I have an app on my phone that tells me when I should check my vehicle's oil. You can set parameters, so if your vehicle uses oil, it goes through about a quart every 2,500 miles, let's say, that you can enter that into this app. And it works really well, because then I know, okay, I'm at, 2,000 miles, I should check it, make sure, and, add if needed. But people rely so much on this stuff. I work on a lot of GM vehicles, as well as other makes and models. The LS series engine is great, and we'll talk more about that once we come back from break.
Yeah, Lee Wickenhauser's with us, and we're talking about used cars and what to look for, what to think about, what to consider, and how to buy one. We're going to get into details when we come back, right after these few short commercial announcements. Lee Wickenhauser's with us, and we're talking about how to buy a used car. Lee, you mentioned the TPS system, the tire pressure sensing system on the wheels that communicates with the vehicle. And these are little boxes that are inside the wheel. They're attached to the tire valve stem. They're little boxes that communicate, measure the pressure inside the tire and wheel assembly, and communicate that to the computer in the vehicle. And these little boxes can be destroyed so easily when someone changes the tire. When you buy new tires.
Absolutely. Some of them use a rubber valve stem to connect, to fasten to the sensor. Some use an aluminum one. They both have their good points and their bad points. The downside is the aluminums. I live in the salt belt of the United States. Minnesota uses all kinds of different anti-icing agents. The way the valve stems are installed on the vehicle or in the placement of the wheel, it's a natural attractant for corrosion to happen, or salt to get in there and start corrosion. So what will happen is, and I've ran into this, Chryslers, Mazdas, they use a aluminum valve stem, and they corrode and break off very easily. And then now you're looking at anywhere from a $35 sensor up to over into the $100 sensors per wheel. So you're forced to buy them, which I don't agree with. I think is something that should be an option, whether you want it turned on or off. The federal government thinks that, we are not intelligent enough to check our own air pressure, when sometimes it's just a lack of education. It's not that we're unintelligent people. It's just a lack of education. Not everybody goes through this or knows what to look for.
Yeah, and it's as simple as this, class. Before I get in my vehicle, wherever I am, whether I'm leaving the farm, whether I've parked in a parking spot at the factory outlet, no matter where I am, I walk around the vehicle. Why? Because I want to see if I picked up a nail or a screw, or I've damaged the tire, or it started to leak, or whether there's an animal or a person behind me. I want to see. So I walk around the vehicle, I look at the tires, and if there's a flat, I'm not moving. I'm going to fix it right there, because moving makes it worse.
Yes.
So, and I park in a place where if I do have a problem, I can work on it, because I expect things to go wrong. That's just the way I live. Lee, when we buy a car, you and I, let's talk about what we do. Let's start the process. So we're thinking about buying a car. What's next?
Well, one of the first things I do, let's start from the beginning. I scout a car. Let's say I find a 99 Dodge Ram 1-ton pickup, 3500 series with a Cummins 5.9 and a manual 5-speed. First thing I do is I Google 99 Dodge Ram 3500 issues and see what pops up. So right away you're populating an idea in your head going, okay, this is, what are the issues this vehicle could potentially have without even going to look at it. So now, let's just say for 99 they have what they call a VP44 injection pump. Very expensive piece on the engine, very necessary. The vehicle will not run without it. So they had an issue. So, you find certain websites that'll go into explanation of what to look for. What should the fuel pressure be going into the injection pump? So, if it's been starved for fuel or, it has been overheated. And also having buying a little palm held scanner is a very important piece to have. You can buy them cheap, just to even see if there's any codes in there, so that way when you do go and look at it, and if you have access to a smartphone or internet at the time, you can Google these things, what these codes actually mean. But after I've scouted the vehicle and kind of looked into what some of the typical problems might be, I'll look into like Google. I'll look and see where the address is to see if it's a neighborhood I'd be comfortable with, or just even geographical location, so I know, okay, this guy lived on a gravel road, I can expect a dirty interior, so it might need a cabin air filter, or, check and make sure the air filter is not plugged with dirt and debris, just because of where the car is. That kind of gives you an idea looking at a person's property. It's snooping around, but it's good detective work. You can see, let's say they have 40 cars sitting in their backyard. Then you at least know that they either are a car person or they just don't take care of things.
Very good points. Very good points. And we do the same thing, class. And by the way, Lee and I have independently figured these things out. We've come to the same conclusions independently. We're going to talk more about that when we come back. And we'll ask Lee what scanner he recommends, and I'll tell you which scanner we have. Wow, this hour is going fast, class. So when I go to look at a vehicle, or if I'm traveling, I bring an inexpensive scanner with me that gives me a rough idea of what might be happening if my car or truck isn't running right. The one I bought for this inexpensive purpose I'll spell the name. It's red and black, and it has a screen. It's Konnwei, Conway, and the model number is KW808. I looked it up on eBay. It's available for the mid-$30 range, and I paid $38. It was more expensive when I bought it, but not by much. It seems to work fine, and it's quick. Lee Wickenhauser, what is the scanner that you use for an inexpensive scanner that we were talking about?
I've got a couple of different ones that I bring. One that I favor the most is the Autel. It's AUTEL, and the model is Autolink AL319er. It's a good little palm-held scanner. It can tell you if there's codes, if there's any history codes in there, and sometimes it'll also give you vehicle parameters too, depending on the vehicle. It's worked on pretty much everything that I've owned or went to look at, except with the exception of Volvo and Mercedes was kind of tricky. But at least it would tell me if there was codes in there, and I could clear codes to see if a symptom would come back. I think it's very instrumental to have one of these. I know, Vince, you and I were talking off air about bringing it when we travel. I absolutely do. And I think it's an important thing. I've been in areas where in situations where I've needed to have a scanner, where I've had a breakdown on the road and, in a travel.
Interesting note, class. I just looked up the Autel, AUTEL, AL319er, and it's the same price point. It's red and black and has a screen. Interesting. And it's portable. What a great way to go. So you might want to consider doing that, class, just to have it, should you be traveling, or should you want to know why your car that you already own is acting up. It'll give you some indications. Sometimes it points you in misleading directions, but it's better than not having one. Lee Wickenhauser, so when you are preparing to buy the car, you start the process by investigating that particular model. Let's talk about the conversation, the telephone call. Or where do you find these vehicles, first of all?
I use all kinds of different resources. I have friends that keep an eye out, or, I do, some maintenance to a friend's car. And I always tell them, if you want, let me know if you're ever selling the car, or, you're thinking about trading it in, let me know. Other than that, I'm finding on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, different resources, internet sites where, people are posting cars for sale. So generally what I'll do is I'll make, if it's online, something, I'll make contact, see if they still have the vehicle, just kind of vet them a little bit, be like, is there any recent problems, any recent major repairs? Cause that way you kind of have it in writing, something you can go back to look at later on and not have to just try and go from memory in a conversation. You generally after that is I'll have a phone conversation and we'll go a little bit more in depth of, okay, if they say, the newer tires. Okay, what does newer tires mean? That's a vague statement. It could have been newer tires 10 years ago and they're dry, rotten, and not holding air anymore. So, kind of feel them out. Okay, what kind of oil did you use? Did you take it to, Valvoline instant oil change every month? Because then they'd have records. Just kind of asking questions. Buying questions, making sure that, they know what they're talking about. But you may get that one person go, my dad took care of the car, or it was my mother-in-law's car. She passed. I don't know. She drove it. So then you kind of get a feel of, okay, now I've got a price point in mind. Let's say car A they're asking $5,000 and they have no vehicle maintenance records. They say newer tires, but they were bought 5 years ago. Okay, now that car might be, to me, worth $3,500 and not $5,000 because of, okay, I don't know what I'm getting into. It's going to need tires, which are expensive. So it kind of gives you some things to consider. And then that way where you kind of need to be at financially to buy the car, or at least be able to, talk offers over the phone with them intelligently.
Mm-hmm. How about the question, do you own the car? Do you have the title? Is there a lien?
That's one of the first questions I ask, and I'm glad you brought that up. Asking, okay, first thing I ask, do you have the title? Do you have a clear title or a lien release card for the car? There have been multiple times people have told me that. I get there and they don't have the title. Then they'd say, I got it from my brother or somebody, and they lost the title. Well, instantly then I walk away from it, because you do not know from a legal standpoint if the car's stolen or if there's a lien against it, and then you're responsible for paying off the loan before you can get a clear title on it. If somebody says they have it, and they have, a smartphone or, Facebook Messenger or something, I have them send me a picture of the title. So I'm not wasting my time to go look at a vehicle that they don't know where the title is, or there's a lien on it and they don't have the lien release card. That way, before getting into, deeper into the situation.
Do you rely on Carfax at all?
Not at all.
Mm-hmm. That's something that we used to do. We used to pay the $29.95 or whatever it happened to be at the time. We don't do that at all. We actually go and look at the vehicle and we make our own determination. Okay, so are we at the point where we're showing up at the seller's location?
Yep.
Okay, now what?
Let's say we make an arrangement. We meet. Typically, I'll either if I'm buying a car, I like to meet at their place. So that way I have a record of, where they live, And I get I get a little bit more secure feeling that, okay, this is a person's home they're inviting me over to, not just some random dark alley. First thing I do is I put my hand on the hood of the vehicle, see if the hood's warm. Okay, so the reason why I do that is it raises some questions to me. Okay, if the hood's warm, why is it warm? Did they run the car and let it warm up because it has a hard start issue? Did they just get home from work? Did they tell me that the car has been sitting for a long time? Why was it sitting? It kind of gives you some extra questions to ask to vet them a little bit farther. There are certain times where, I like that they have the car warm. If it's extremely cold out, it's nice to have that, but yet I still prefer, when you go to test drive, it's nice to get into a nice warm car and not sit there and freeze. But I still would rather have them not start it, because then you can get a feel for yourself how this car is going to start in cold weather, hot weather. And from there, I do my visual walk around. I have them start the vehicle. I listen for engine noises, whether there's excessive lifter noise or a lower end knock or just an exhaust leak. Just listen to it. And it kind of gives you an idea if you're hearing, an initial cold startup. It's a little rattly, but then after about 2 seconds, it goes away. That doesn't concern me as much, but still does raise some concerns. After that, I let it run for, as it's running, I'll check the oil, see if it smells like gas or if there's a milky haze on it. Things that would indicate, a blown head gasket or a cracked head or, bad intake gasket. So there I'm kind of looking at, because now the oil's not all mixed up in the engine as much as it would be when it's, been warmed up for a half an hour. Then from there, it gives me some other stuff to check. You're able to check the coolant levels when it's cold. I don't like going into it, going there and then the engine's at full operating temperature. It kind of raises a couple concerns for me. But you never know. The person may have been driving it to work that day and just, they just got home.
Okay, so let me make a sound for the class to hear. And you talked about a tap or a knock. So if the engine's idling and you hear that sound, what does that mean to you, Lee Wickenhauser?
Could be a collapsed lifter. It really depends on what the vehicle is. Sometimes I've had vehicles where they've had really noisy injectors. So you hear that just kind of really tinny tick, 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 tick. And then sometimes it could mean that a lifter's collapsing, or you have excessive wear on a rocker arm, or you could have a bad camshaft. It kind of depends on the scenario, whether the engine's hot, cold, at what RPM. Does it go away at 1,500 RPMs? It only does it at an idle. Prime example, I currently drive a 2005 Nissan Altima with a 3.5 liter V6. It's been cold up here. When I first start it, I can hear a little tick, 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 and then it goes away about 2 seconds later. That just means that the high oil hydraulic system has it drained down overnight, and it just takes a few seconds for that oil pump to create pressure back in that hydraulic system again. So then it goes away. You're still getting proper lubrication. If you're hearing that, you don't hear it when you first start it and it gets more and more apparent. A, it could be low on oil. B, the oil could be just really dirty, or there's excessive wear in the engine that wouldn't be there, because as metals get hotter, they expand. So your tolerances become tighter. It's just kind of things to look for when you hear those noises.
Okay. So it could be, and I totally agree with what you said, it could be a fuel injector problem, which is not a big deal. You could solve that for between, let's say, $25 and $100. If you do it yourself, it could be a sticky lifter, which maybe you can clean out with, some Marvel Mystery Oil. Or it could be a worn cam lobe if it's an older V8 engine, right? That's a bigger problem, way bigger.
It is, and even in the newer vehicles, GM has had issues for years with the LS series engines where the cams, the roller lifters, the wheels will seize and just grind the cam lobe completely off. They've had issues with that, and some of the newer ones, like the 2000 and newer, some of them have the cylinder shut down for gas mileage reasons. Some of those are notorious for it because it's an actual hydraulic system that turns them on and off. that's activated by a solenoid. So if that solenoid fails, and then all of a sudden now you're not getting proper oil pressure to those lifters, what's going to happen? They're not going to function properly, and it's going to prematurely wear them out. And it's a very expensive fix. You take it to a dealership, it can be $3,000 or more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. And we have a friend who shows up here every once in a while, and she drives a Jeep on a mail route. And she came one day, and we heard that tapping. And our son happened to greet her first, and he said, you've got a lifter problem. And I came around the corner, and I said, from 20 feet or 50 feet away, I said, you've got a lifter problem. She said, I know, I just heard. And she had been to the dealer many times to get it fixed. And we said, here's what you say. You tell them you want it replaced, and it's a cam problem with a lifter. And she got it fixed, but they didn't want to do it until she confronted them. We'll be right back. Lee Wickenhauser is with us, and we're talking about buying a used car. Lee, I have a rule here at the house. Vehicles for us have to be white. And it's not because of any issue other than the weather. And from my perspective, if a car is dark in color, black or dark red or dark green or dark brown, what happens is when they sit in the sun, that sun heats up the roof, heats up everything, and the headliners tend to come down faster. The interior gets beat up more. And in the summer, when you get in the car, if you've got the windows up, it's way hotter. And it's harder for the air conditioning to cool it down. And I think that dark colored vehicles kind of blend in with the road, whereas a white vehicle is easier to see for other people, and maybe they're less likely to crash into you. So those are the reasons for a white car. Does color make a preference, or does color preference enter into your equation when you buy a car, for you and for others?
For others, it generally doesn't. I know some people that prefer black cars, white cars, gray, silver. Personally, I agree with you. I like white. I live on a gravel road, and I feel that the white stays cleaner longer. I try and stay with lighter colors. For a while, I had a couple of cars that were just kind of old beaters. You know, I used to run into town or drive out on the farm, that were kind of a sandy dust colored or a real light gold color. I never washed them because you couldn't tell when it was dirty. That I like that aspect. Some people, my soon-to-be wife, for example, she hates red cars. She refuses to own a red car. Why, I don't know. It's just her preference. To me, color doesn't matter so much unless I get into a collector status. If it's just something that I drive, I would prefer a lighter colored car, but, you know, if the price is right, I don't care what color it is.
And you live in a kind of a colder area than we do here, so maybe the light-colored car is not quite as important in the summer. But here, it's unbearable, literally unbearable to get in. If you have a black car with a black interior, it's pretty hot inside in the sun. Okay, so what else? You've opened the hood. You're at the seller's site. What else do? You feel the hood to see if it's warm. You listen to sounds. You've checked the oil to see if it smells like gas. Now, that happens. Class, this is really important. Gasoline should not be in your engine oil if your engine is running properly. What does that mean to you, Lee Wickenhauser? Gas smell in the engine oil.
It could be a couple of different things. It could be a faulty catalytic emission system. Fuel pressure regulator could be bad. Fuel injector could be sticking or a cracked nozzle. It can also mean if it's carbureted, it could be, you know, the jets or the floats are stuck and it's dumping more gas and it's running too rich. Also could be, you know, an oxygen sensor could be functioning improperly, and your vehicle may not be coming out of what's called closed loop, which is a warm-up cycle. So it introduces more gas into the engine to create more heat faster, so your car warms up and gets up to an operating temp faster. Then it will go into open loop after that. So, you know, there's things that you can kind of tell by doing that, by smelling it. If you let your car idle a lot, sometimes you'll get a little tiny bit more of a smell to it. But if it's a real strong gassy smell, it raises some concern. And then at that point, if I do see that, I walk away from the vehicle. I just, it could be the main bearings could be ready to go out, or the oil pump, just due to somebody driving it for that. Because what gas will do is it actually washes away the lubrication properties out of the oil and from the bearings. So now you're talking about metal to metal contact, which is very, very bad.
When we come back, I've got some questions, Lee. One is, do you go alone? And we'll talk about this on the other side of the top of the hour news and commercial announcements. Do you go alone, or do you go with someone else? Do you ask the question, why are you selling the car? Is there a best time or best season or best month to buy a car? And then, do you have someone follow you when you test drive the car? And do you look at the exhaust, and do you look for sounds coming out of the exhaust and the rhythmic sound of the exhaust? And collector's cars. What are your thoughts on collector's cars? Can we talk about that when we come back?
Sure.
Okay. Lee Wickenhauser's with us. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Special broadcast on how to buy a used car. Lee Wickenhauser's with us. Lee, when you go to buy a car, do you go alone, or do you bring another person with you, and why?
Kind of depends on the scenario. If I'm buying something that's not running, I always try and bring somebody along with me. I have a trailer, so sometimes I can do it by myself, but I typically have 1 to 2 people come with me. There's a couple of my friends I always call upon to come with me, either to drive a vehicle back, but they're also gearheads like I am, so I have a second pair of eyes. They may notice something that I didn't because I'm in conversation with the owner. And it's always good to have that, so that way it's not to gang up on the owner. It's just sometimes it's like a second opinion without having to ask for it. It's just they're interested in it too, and they kind of have a little bit of a stake in it due to their time. So they want to pick it over as well. Having somebody that has some good automotive knowledge to come along is always a benefit.
Mm-hmm. And in our case, most of the time we use a tow dolly. Unless it's an all-wheel drive vehicle, then we would use a trailer. But if it's a front-wheel drive or a rear-wheel drive vehicle, we just bring a tow dolly behind, a pickup truck. And if the vehicle's not running, we'll position the tow dolly by hand. Then we'll back our truck up to the tow dolly, when the tow dolly is in perfect position. And then we'll use a come-along, kind of a ratchet on a cable, and we'll pull the vehicle onto the tow dolly. Sometimes, if it's facing downhill, and we can just use gravity to help us, get a couple guys, and we push the vehicle on the tow dolly, and then we strap it down. But in our case, I like to bring someone else for the same reasons, another set of eyes. And what about if the vehicle runs and you want to test drive it? Let's talk about that procedure. What do you do to test drive the vehicle? What do you look for when you're in the seat?
First thing I always do is I always engage the vehicle into reverse, count how many seconds it takes for it to actually, where you feel it go into gear, go into neutral, put it in drive, do the same thing. If it takes more than a second or two for it to go into gear, there could be upcoming transmission issues. And then how I feel, listen for clunks or creaks. If you hear a clunk as soon as you put it into gear, could need a new transmission mount, engine mounts, U-joints, or the ring and pinion could be severely worn if it's rear-wheel drive. The torque converter could be bad. So there's multiple things that can kind of go wrong depending on the vehicle. So how that engages is a very important thing. When you take off, if you take off very slow, making sure the transmission doesn't slip, take off a little bit harder, make sure it's not slipping. Then after that, the importance is the shifting between gears. If they hit really hard and you're not driving a sports car, that could mean excessive wear, or there could be a solenoid bad, or the governor spring could be wore. So just making sure everything should function as it should, depending on what the vehicle is. If you're driving a Corvette, obviously the transmission is going to shift firmer than it would in a Buick. So, and then just,
Yep.
at that point, you're kind of feeling for shakes, rattles, if the steering pulls to one side, if you're going down the road and there's something out there that people call the death wobble, if the steering wheel just starts shaking violently, if the parts are excessively worn in the steering, if the shocks are bad, the heat works, the AC works, or, the windows go up and down. That's where I really test the operating system is on a test drive. I always try to go at minimum 7 miles. Unless, it's in the city and, if you're in an area where it's a little bit tougher. I always try and put on a decent amount of miles so I get a good feel for it. If it's something I'm going to keep or it's something I'm buying for a friend, I may take a little bit longer of an extended drive. If the owner comes along, great. Typically, I prefer not to because then I can kind of feel things out and I don't get distracted by conversation.
Okay, and that's a very important point because if you go for a test drive at a dealership, used car lot, one of the first things that the salesperson does is turn on the radio.
Yep.
And the next thing that happens is I turn off the radio because I'm not listening. I'm not buying a radio. I'm buying everything else. And that's what I'm concerned about. And I want to hear those noises that you're talking about, the shifting of the transmission, the clunking between reverse and drive. And one thing that I do if I'm on a flat road, if the steering appears to be fine, I will take my hands off the wheel. I'll have my hands right next to the wheel to grab it should something go wrong. But I want to see if it wanders. Does it pull to the left? Does it pull to the right? Because then I'm looking at a front-end alignment, which could cost between $59 and $79. Mm-hmm. It's an additional expense. And I look at the tires as well because that gives me an indication as to the alignment, unless the tires have been switched and changed. And then I'm kind of thrown off course as to, tire wear. And what about the air conditioning and the heater? What do you do to evaluate them?
Looking at where the temperature gauge is, if the car has a temperature gauge, most do nowadays, if it's in the right position, if the heat's blowing out like it should. Granted, we just had some horrific weather up here. It was negative, negative 50s up here with wind chill. So there was a lot of cars out there that weren't heating very well. So, making sure that there's enough heat coming out to keep you warm and also keep your windows clear. Make sure that the vents are working properly, whether it's the defrost, the floor heat, or, the vents, or a mixture of it all. Being, Minnesota, a lot of vehicles have rear defrost back windows, making sure that works properly, that, the majority of the lines work. Once in a while, I get one or two lines don't work. That's not necessarily a deal breaker for me, but just making sure that works. That's where I kind of get into the heat things, making sure that I'm going to be comfortable and my kids and my soon-to-be wife are all going to be comfortable while driving.
I agree with everything that you said for as long as we've been on the air today. Okay, so let's talk about the battery. Do you look at the battery? Do you look at the date code on the label, that little label that may say 1-16 or 1-14 or 3-18? What does that mean to you, or doesn't it mean much?
I absolutely look at that because batteries are very expensive. So I will look and see, okay, the battery's within a year old or 2 years old. We're in a cold weather climate. So, batteries wear out a lot faster here than they do anywhere else. So that comes into a factor, especially when, you get to a point where you are starting to negotiate pricing.
I actually bought a classic vehicle, and the guy said to me on the phone, okay, the battery does not come with this. We'll put one in to get it started, but then it's coming out before you leave. And why? Because batteries are expensive. And what do they cost? If you get them at Walmart, you're looking at, let's say $80 on up. And if you don't have the core, there's another $18 plus a battery fee of 50 cents plus sales tax.
Yep.
So a battery can cost easily over $100. If you go to an AutoZone or an O'Reilly or an Advance Auto or Pep Boys or a place like that, you're looking at way more than that, probably 30% or more expensive than Walmart. So, yeah, the battery is an important thing. So what does that 1-17 mean on the label on the battery? That means January of 2017. And so how long can you expect a battery to last for most instances? To me, it's about 3 years of useful life. Then they've deteriorated to the point where if the weather's cold, the batteries typically don't have enough reserve cranking capacity or reserve current to turn the vehicle over in cold weather. Do you agree with that, Lee Wickenhauser?
I definitely agree with that. Making sure that the proper size battery is in there and what the terminal condition looks like. If there's a lot of green stuff on there, it's kind of, okay, it needs to either be cleaned or there could be, some charging issues or just neglect. Some cars just sit for a long time. So you'll get that. But absolutely making sure that, for a V8 engine, you want to have a minimum of, typically 750, 800 cold cranking amps, just so when it's cold out, you have enough power to start the vehicle. The manufacturer code on there, like you had mentioned, 1-18 means it was manufactured January 1st of 18. So that battery today would be a year old. So typically that's still pretty good yet. I myself, I have owned a couple diesel trucks. I buy the higher priced batteries. So I take that into the consideration of if you have a battery in there from Walmart or low end O'Reilly's or AutoZone battery, I take that into consideration because those batteries typically are not meant to last as long as a higher end battery. In my opinion, batteries are kind of, you get what you pay for.
Now, when you say a higher end, you're talking about Interstate?
Interstate's a good brand. Some of these other ones, the ones I use are actually a Batteries Plus House brand. My friend Cody works there, and he had recommended them to me. I have had the same batteries in one of my diesel trucks for 10 years. And this truck sits outside. Sometimes I forget to plug it in the cold winters. That truck is yet to fail to start, and it's due to the batteries.
Interesting the similarities that I'm finding with this broadcast, Lee. We haven't talked about many of these things prior, and we just set up an account with Batteries Plus. It's also known as Batteries Plus Bulbs, and I just bought our first battery from them, expecting exactly what you said, a higher quality battery, and for our farm equipment. And I want them to last 10 years. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. All right, so batteries are important because now you talked about diesels. Diesels, trucks typically have two batteries, at least our Dodge truck does. And so when you're looking at replacing a couple of them, you're looking at $300. What do you think about the cylindrical celled batteries like these glass mat batteries, AGM? I'm not particularly crazy about them, and I don't want to buy them, but have you had an experience that's better than that?
Yes, I have.
So you like them?
I've had a couple of them that are good. Some are good, some are bad. Personally, I like the house brand standard plate style. I think they last longer. I think the internal shorts are less.
Yeah, that's what I mean. We're talking about a standard battery is your best value. We'll be right back. Lee Wickenhauser's with us. Lee, when I go to pick up a vehicle, I don't know if it's in running condition, safe running condition. Now, of course, most of the people I've talked to on the phone will say, oh, yeah, you can drive it home, but I may not like the tires. I may not like the brakes. I may not like the steering, but I may think that I can fix those things based on the price of the vehicle. And, I'm looking at value to me. What is it worth to me and what's it going to cost me? And I don't know all the answers because in 15, 30, 45 minutes, 2 hours, I still don't have enough time to look at the vehicle the way I'd really like to. What I'd really like to do is put it up on a lift, test drive it, hear it run. I'd like to spend half a day, but no one's going to allow me to spend half a day. So I bring a tow dolly with me most of the time or a trailer. Can you tell us why a tow dolly might be better in some cases or a trailer might be necessary in some cases?
Just the ease of, with a tow dolly, you don't need a large vehicle sometimes to tow them. I mean, they do have their capacities and their limitations, but, sometimes they work better. If you're in the city, it's a lot nicer sometimes having a tow dolly or you're in a tight quarter situation. Personally, I like a trailer. I've got a couple different car trailers. So I'm able to tow them home or, winch them up if they don't run. There's been a couple times I've bought in one car because it has a good transmission, and I've bought in another one that has a bad engine that are the same make and model, or I can interchange parts. And then that way, I can just kind of build one out of two. So having a trailer has its advantages, but it's also, more wear and tear. It is heavier. It's a little bit harder on the tow vehicle, depending on, the weight of the trailer and what you're hauling. So they have their both good and bad points. I personally don't have a tow dolly. Generally, I feel that if I have a car trailer, I really don't need the dolly. But there are times I wished I had a dolly,
I totally agree with everything you've said. Now, I have a farm trailer, so it's tall, and it's harder to get a vehicle up on there. It's a 16-footer, and it doesn't have fenders. It's used for hauling hay, but it's got ramps, and I can, with great difficulty, I can get a vehicle on there, but it's not a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. Then we have a 26-foot gooseneck, which has extended ramps, and it's a lot easier, and it's got a beaver tail, which is a step down, sloped back, which is great for hauling a car, but who wants to haul a 5,500-pound trailer around without a car on it, and then you had to weigh the car? So that's kind of a tough thing to do. But then again, we're farmers, so that's why we have a tow dolly. And a tow dolly class is, it's like a trailer, but it has two wheels and ramps, but it really doesn't have a deck. And you just drive the vehicle onto the front, you lock it down. You've seen these on the highway. U-Haul rents them. Either you pull the car forward or backward, depending on whether it's front-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive. But if the car is rear-wheel drive and we use a tow dolly and we drive the vehicle on to the tow dolly facing the same direction as the towing vehicle, what can we do to the rear end, Lee Wickenhauser, if we do that?
Well, first of all, if the car's or the truck, let's say just use a truck, for example, if you're pulling it so the front wheels are on the dolly, that drive shaft is spinning. You have to make sure the vehicle's in neutral. And if it's an automatic transmission, and you can damage the transmission indefinitely doing it that way, towing them in an automatic in neutral. It overheats because you're still cycling, or parts are still moving inside there. So unless you want to let the vehicle idle and have it neutral, so you're still getting the cooling properties from the transmission to the transmission, that's a no-no. Towing it backwards, sometimes you're limited on length, so you're not able to do that. So it really won't hurt the rear differential, just because the internal parts, it's a self-sealed system, so it'll continue to lubricate and cool just like you'd normally do when you're driving. There's been times where I've removed the drive shaft, so I could tow a vehicle that way on a dolly before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, class, the point is the differential can, if you're pulling a vehicle facing forward and it's a rear-wheel drive, the rear end can take being pulled with the front wheels off the ground, but the automatic transmission can't. So you don't want to do that. You do want to take the drive shaft out, and then you want to put a bag, some kind of a plastic bag with a tie wrap on it, to prevent dirt from getting into the end of the transmission where you just pull the drive shaft out. And you can do all this in 15 minutes if you can get under the vehicle. The other way of doing it is, if it's rear-wheel drive, back the vehicle onto the tow dolly.
Oh, exactly.
And tie down the steering wheel with a tie-down strap and ratchet tightly so the steering wheel does not move. And you want the steering wheel to face straight ahead. Okay. When we come back, let's talk about the question, why are you selling this vehicle? Lee Wickenhauser and I will be right back. Lee Wickenhauser is with us, 2-hour special on how to buy a used car. Lee, the question, why are you selling the car? That's a question I always ask, and I'm pretty darn sure you do the same thing.
I absolutely do the same thing. It kind of gives you a way to feel them out, whether they're going to be honest with you or not. But here's a really good example. I have a lot of friends that always have me looking for cars for them or their kids, or first-time car buyer. So I went and looked at a 2003 Acura TL after some messages back and forth through email. And I got there and I asked him, I said, why are you selling this? The car's been in the garage for the last year and a half. Why? And he goes, honestly, there needs a control arm bushing. It's not safe to drive. He goes, somebody that knows how to fix it. It's a simple and easy fix. And he was right. And then he goes, I got a DWI. And he goes, I can't afford car insurance. it doesn't pay for me to have the car for another 2 years just sitting here rotting away. And to me, that's an honest answer. If somebody just says, oh, I just don't need it anymore, and that's the only car that they have, kind of raises some questions, or you can kind of get in the frame of mind that they're in of, okay, I'm selling the car because I'm buying a new car and the dealership won't give me anything on trade. So now you have a little bit of negotiating power as well. So that's the reason why I ask, and it kind of makes the owner of the car or the seller to give you a little bit more information, keep digging and go, why is this? Maybe is the guy's getting rid of it because he's tired of putting money into it. And I've had a lot of people be honest with me that, hey, it needs a $50 part, and I don't want to put another penny into it. He goes, I'm done. I bought a new car. So it's a good way to find out. They could be BSing you. I've also had, times where I've gone there and I've had people just straight out ask me, do you have the cash with you? And that raises a huge red flag for me. Just kind of gives me an unsettling feeling of I may need to just tuck and run, and I have.
Excellent points. Because typically, class, the seller will not take a check because they don't know you. So now we have two parties that don't know each other, and there is distrust. There is. And there should be. And there should be, because a lot of times the sellers will lie to you. They'll say, oh, it's great, and you can drive it home, and that's not the case necessarily. What about what about other heads up type discussions that you may have that tell you, you know what, I got to go because this is not getting good. For example, it's happened to us, and we wanted to look at the engine oil, the transmission oil, and the seller started yelling at us. I was with my son, and the seller started yelling at us like, "You're going to take this apart? I just told you, it's great." I mean, literally, he was screaming at us. And my son said, "Will you take a check?" And the guy said, "No." And my son said, "That's why I want to look."
Yeah.
Because what he was saying is, you don't trust us, so I just want to verify it. And the guy calmed right down because he realized he was out of control. But our son was ready to walk right then and there. And it was a Mercedes for $1,000. And it was a good car. It was really, really a good way to go for us. And so, but my son is now at the point where he's not going to take it anymore. If someone jumps him and is hostile, he's leaving.
Yep.
And I don't blame him. How do you feel about that?
I feel the exact same way. I've walked away from cars just from people being very impolite and rude. When I on the opposite end of the spectrum, if somebody comes in to where I'm selling a car and just right away is combative with me, nitpicks it, I'll be like, "Oh yeah, it's got a scratch here, it's got a ding there," and they're like, "Oh, the windshield wipers are bad." I'm like, "Okay, I'll knock off $10. How does that sound?" Just kind of work it that way. Just kind of give them a reason to giving them reasons to defuse themselves and not be in a hostile situation. Mm-hmm. Here's a good little tidbit. I'm on Facebook. There's people that have local city sites like the Real Life in Chaska or the Real Life in Carver, and people ask for help. Is this a good car, or could somebody look at my car? As of recently, that was a scenario. A lady asked if I could come look at her daughter's car, and I went and looked at it, and I told her, I said, "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tow your car with your permission to my place where I have a heated shop and a hoist. I will look it over, and I will give you an accurate description of what needs to be fixed and how much it would cost you to fix it. I will do this for free, but if you decide to fix the car, I would like to do the repairs." I said it'll be cheaper, and I'm a very good mechanic. And she agreed to it. The final assessment was the car was not worth them fixing. For them, it wasn't a good investment. So in the end, they ended up buying a car from me that I wasn't actually even had for sale. She just asked me, she goes, "Do you have a car for my daughter? She's looking for something around XYZ price range." And I said, "I will in a couple of days. I'm doing intake gaskets on it. And I was going to drive it for work, but I'm open to selling it." And right away, her eyes lit up. She's like, "Oh, you're fixing this? Why?" And I said, "Well, it's a common GM problem. It was a Chevy Impala with a 3400 series motor." And she goes, "Oh, okay. Yeah, well, can we come and look at it?" And I said, "Yeah, well, you can come drive it now. It runs and drives. I want to make sure this car is top notch before I would either A, drive it, or B, I sell it. So, doing that, feeling that out, feeling out the buyer, feeling out the seller goes both ways, is the reason why I'm bringing this up, because now I have a customer pretty much for life, or a friend that they rely on me to do this, to make sure I'm being honest with them. On the other side of that, her son was driving it, slid into a tree, smacked up the front end. She's like, can you look it over, make sure it's safe? So they instill trust into me that I'm going to keep their family safe. And that's kind of the outlook I have, is when I go look at a vehicle for sale, is this going to be safe for myself and my family? And, that's why some of these questions need to be asked, and people need to know what to ask.
And that's what's happening to us here at the farm. Our son's customers are finding that they can't trust other people to do the job properly, but they trust him. And basically now they just bring the car in, and he calls them and says, here's what it needs in addition to what you thought. Or you can hold off on these things because he knows what they do with the cars. He knows their use of the car, and he will advise them honestly and charge less than everybody else, but still do a better job. So that's where that trust comes in. I have a feeling that that's what you do. Is that right?
That is exactly it. I have just earlier this morning, I had bought a car on behalf of a friend of mine and for her son. And then she calls me up, okay, well, my other son's car died. Can you find me another one? So I found him another one. She sent me a message this morning saying, we have a very close family friend that has this budget. They're looking for this. Can you find this? Mm-hmm. And because I have that rapport with them, they trust me to do it. If I sell a car, I make sure it's something that's going to be, it's not going to be problematic for somebody. It's going to be safe for a while. I make sure tires are good. But the price when I sell a car also reflects that. If I had bought in parts, I always bring a receipt. I go, okay, I put this in, I did this at this date, this mileage. I keep a log, so that way I have something to show. And when you go to look at a car, if nobody has any history on it, that right away drops the value on it, because I don't know if they're telling the truth or not. Mm-hmm. Anybody can say, oh, I did the timing belt, but how do you know? Mm-hmm. You can't. It's hard to take apart, an engine in somebody's driveway, so you don't really know. I mean, certain vehicles you can take the covers off, and look for a date stamp, but you never know the mileage.
Lee, what we do is we take pictures during the process of everything. The original fuel filter, like let's say our son's fixing someone's car. It's up on the lift. Needs a new fuel filter. There's a picture of the old one. There's a picture of the same vehicle with the new one, a few minutes later. If it's serpentine belts or idler pulleys or tensioners or an alternator, here's the old picture. Here's the new one. Here's the part. And if there's a core charge, then the customer is certainly able to take the parts, the used parts with them. But if it's a core charge, they can do that too, but they just have to pay the core cost. Let's talk about the best time to buy a car. Is there a best time to cars? A best month, best season?
Typically spring and fall are about the best times. This time of year, it's a little bit harder to buy just because I think people think their cars are worth a little bit more because of people getting tax returns. So people have a little bit more extra money to spend. So people raise the prices. Typically spring and fall, because either spring comes along and people are like, okay, I just bought this car to drive in the winter. I don't need it anymore, or I'm going to buy a new car because it's tax-free. I got my taxes back, and I'm going to have X amount of money I can spend on a new car, so now their car is going to be for sale. Or in fall, they're like, either, okay, I don't want to drive this anymore, I want a newer car for winter, so it might be a little bit cheaper. The weather's nice, and it's cool enough out. You can test the heater in an actual colder, a little bit colder weather. So that's a good time. That, like you and I had talked off air about corrosion. It's a good time because now everything's not covered in salt. It's not covered in ice. You can kind of get a good look at least in my area. Making sure certain areas are free of, major corrosion or parts missing. I always Google rust areas on, let's just say, Pontiac Grand Prix. The rear strut towers are known for rusting out, and you can't see it without pulling the carpet back in the trunk. Making sure that's safe, because if that goes through breaks off in the metal, you could have a really bad potential hazard there. So making sure that the body isn't rusted off. And a lot of new cars have a lot of body cladding or plastic panels covering metal, so it's a little bit harder to tell. So you want to take a good look at the bottom side of a car if you live in an area that is really high in salt and corrosion like Minnesota is. And I know Iowa is a little bit, Missouri, a little bit, you know.
Do you ever get the question? I'll tell you what, I want to buy this car. The guy will let me take it to a mechanic. What would you charge me to look at the car, put it up on the lift, do an inspection of brakes, wheels, tires, suspension, steering gear, engine, transmission, differential, shocks, all that? Do you have a feel for what that should cost?
It depends on the vehicle. If it's, I'm just going to throw this out here. I'm going to say a Nissan Altima of 2005. I would say $50. It's roughly 3/4 of an hour for me to go through the systems. And then that way I can kind of, I can pull off the tires, check the brakes. I can put it up on my hoist and I can check the steering components, the ball joints, check all the fluids and look for leaks and, you know, check filters over and really test it. So it's anywhere from 50 to 150 is usually top end.
Okay. Yep. For us, it's about 75. So we're in the same ballpark. When we come back, let's talk about collectors' cars. Are they good investments? Should people consider them? Or are they money pits? Or are they just fun to have? And don't worry about the money. Lee Wickenhauser is with us, 2-hour special on buying used car. Now we're going to be talking about the collector's cars. And typically we're talking 1960s, 1970s American cars in that range. Lee Wickenhauser, from my perspective, at a vintage car from that era, all rubber parts are suspect. I'm talking about simple things like shock absorber bushings, motor mounts, more complicated. All the rubber parts, the brake seals, the dust boots, anything that's made with rubber. Fan belts would be very simple, but anything made with rubber, I'm going to look at because in my world, there's a great possibility, almost a certainty, that they're going to have to be replaced, and there are going to be leaks everywhere. Do you agree with that or not?
Absolutely. Most cars that you find have been stored incorrectly. Either it's climate or they didn't use any preventative for rubber parts to not dry out, or they were outside, or they're just at the age where the soft parts, as I call them, are just past their life expectancy. So I always go into it looking at a collector car that 80% of the soft parts or rubber parts are going to have to be replaced, at least to either A, make it B, roadworthy or something that's going to last for a long time. But depending on the vehicle, like you and I were talking, recently I acquired a 68 Cougar, 428 4-speed, one-of-one car, very rare, very clean, all original. That car, I will not touch the soft parts unless I absolutely have to, just to keep it that original. It's something where you can see that something's original. It keeps its value.
I bought my children think I've lost my mind, but I have two American Motors AMXs, 1968, and that was the car that was going to fight the Corvette. That was the car that had two seats. There were only two American sports cars back in 1968. That was the Corvette and the American Motors AMX. And I have a 390 4-speed. I've got another one that's an automatic 290, and I have spare engines. And I found on Craigslist a guy that was selling a station wagon, an American Motors Ambassador 1968 station wagon. It's called a Cross Country. And that year was the very first year that any American manufacturer put air conditioning in a vehicle standard. Mm-hmm. So air conditioning is, the AMXs don't have air conditioning, but this particular vehicle does. It has all the original parts. But I bought it because of the engine. I wanted to have an extra engine, and I wanted to have an extra transmission. And the transmissions and engines, I can just drop them into the AMXs. I paid $1,300 for this, which I think was reasonable that's a really rare engine to find that runs. And the guy that was selling it to me said, yeah, this is the vehicle that Brad Pitt used to ride around in because it was a friend of the family, and he used to ride around in the back of this when he was a child. to me, that's interesting, but it has no value to me with this vehicle. I mean, how many people am I going to say, yeah, Brad Pitt used to ride around this? Not too many. It's not that important to me. How important is who sat in the vehicle? How important is that to the price that you, Lee Wickenhauser, would be willing to pay?
It depends on who it was, if I can prove it or they can prove it, and what kind of car it is. So, I mean, there is some value there. You know, if it was Lee Marvin's, Shelby Mustang that disappeared for decades, that car would definitely have a higher value. You know, if you're talking about, Mario Andretti's car or something, there'd definitely be a value there and be something I'd be a little bit more intrigued to buy. If it's just somebody, like Brad Pitt, I'm not a big fan of Brad Pitt, but that's my personal opinion. So please don't let that reflect anything else. But, to me, it wouldn't have any opinion.
Okay. Well, I happen to have a Porsche 928, 1979. It used to belong to H. Ross Perot, who ran for president. Mm-hmm. Does that have any more value?
Definitely.
Being H. Ross Perot's?
To the right collector, yes.
And what percentage increase would that be? Would it be 5%, 20%?
Maybe 20.
50%?
Yeah. It depends, a person, if they're collecting a car for a personal investment or for a financial investment. It's two separate worlds.
Lee, we spent 2 hours together. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it was quite informative. We shared our personal opinions and what we've learned. Can you come back?
Sure. Yeah, most definitely.
Want to do it once a month?
Yeah, we can try and do that.
All right. There you go. Lee Wickenhauser, thank you so much.
You are absolutely welcome, Vinny.